بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
All right then. So, Assalamu alaikum, everybody. It's been a while since we all gathered like this, and it's been a long time, but it's good to have the group back together. I wanted to catch up with you and see how you're doing, but I guess I should start with Neil because Neil, since all of us were together, a lot has changed for you. So why don't you give us a little update about what's been happening over at your end?
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Thank you so much for inviting us. First and foremost, it's been an amazing month for myself. So I guess as a bit of a life coach, I suppose that I have to set my own goals and my own dreams and live the dream that I'm proving people that you can actually do that. You can make a change to your life and set a pathway to get to them. So about 6 months ago, during the first lockdown, I decided that this was really, becoming too much. It was becoming too much to be in that isolation period. And I was thinking, what can I do to go and help humanity, B, get out to somewhere where the weather is good and a change of scenery. And I contacted a charitable foundation called Tamani Foundation in the north of the island of Zanzibar. It's an island where my father was born, my marhum father, and I decided to connect with them and to discover a pathway that I can actually come out here and do some voluntary work. So I first approached my employer and I applied for a sabbatical leave, which was granted. So I took 12 months off work so I could have some space. And I thought, let me start this year of 2021 by coming out to the island and doing a bit of teaching, giving back to the local village, giving back to some orphans, and teaching some widows as well, various kind of things. So I'm working for the Tamani Foundation. I left the UK at the beginning of January, just before they closed all the borders. And I've been coming up to the end of my first month now, being here. So basically got stuck in straight away, literally staying in. I'm in my room now, volunteers quarters. It's basic living, but alhamdulillah, we're happy to have a roof over our head and clean, fresh water. We're teaching English, doing 4 classes a week, teaching English oral to the students, showing them different styles of communication, using technology. So I'm using my laptop, PowerPoint projectors, coming away from the traditional methods that they use at this school with blackboards, chalkboards, and sort of teachers are very traditional in their methods. Away from the classroom, I'm doing evaluations with other teachers to see their teaching style, and then working one-to-one with them to help them improve their style so they can be more interactive with their students, so the students can benefit more. They're primary school kids, so they benefit through fun, through playing, using techniques like the VAC style, visual, audio, kinesthetic, trying to understand their students, trying to get the best of their students. And then I'm also working with the management team of Tamani Foundation to try to help them as well to communicate better with their residents. They have a villa, which is on the beach, which subsidizes the school. So the school is a charity and it's amazing. The concept is phenomenal. I mean, they're luxury villas. Any money that's being spent at the villa is literally plowed back into the school and given free education to the village and to the orphans. And then there's evening classes as well, which I'm doing. So teaching basic computers, just how to turn a computer on, how to use Word, how to type, and then teaching English as well to the adults in the village. So yeah, I mean, I'm here for 3 months. Alhamdulillah, it's a great experience. It's a humbling experience. It's a total change of life. Like literally, the way we are in the West, we're so fortunate to have so many things at our fingertips. I was just saying to us before we started recording that we had no electricity all afternoon. And although, I could continue with the show, but, it's 30 odd degrees here. It's very difficult to operate without a fan, which is kind of blowing at me right now. my first evening of being here, I had to walk across the village to go and get something to eat. And it's pitch black, like you can see every star in the sky. And alhamdulillah, it's just the most beautiful experience, and that connection, that spirituality to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is phenomenal. So I'm walking along, kind of walking like a Londoner through this village, and I nearly got run over. I was about an inch away from getting hit by a cow that kind of walked straight past me. So that's how rural the village is. There's chickens, goats, cows, you know, just kind of roaming around. And it's part of sort of everyday life. So after a month now, alhamdulillah, the villagers are kind of getting used to me. You know, they're waving, hey teacher, Mambo, VP, Salama, and they're waving away. And my Swahili, I'm slowly getting there, you know, small words here and there. I think, but most of all, I'm really spending a great deal of time connecting back and giving back to humanity, giving back to the people where my father was born, in the near for him. So inshallah, some thawab is going to him in his qabr. Also doing a bit of healing for myself, getting away from everything, getting away from all the stresses of Western life, and just connecting really spiritually with God again, and just finding my way, grounding myself. So that's pretty much my journey.
Amazing.
And yeah, here I am. Any questions, please let me know.
Yeah, I mean, I really want to, everything you said, it sounds like a dream. And we're London and New York right now, and that we can't really compare to that level of like escape to nature. Sh.Jaffer, anything you can say to make Neil miss in the UK? I don't think so. How are things your end?
I would offer him Arsenal, but even they're terrible. They're not playing very well. It's nothing to come back for.
How are you enjoying?
Thanks.
Are you enjoying what's been happening? Where are you? And you actually had a signing recently as well, didn't you?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you, Brother Abbas, for inviting us onto this program. The gang is back together from our first discussion. I think it was over the preparing for Muharram and Arba'in discussion. So thank you very much. So I finished my contract at Hujjat Stanmore and have moved some 3.5 hours north to Leeds, which is kind of like the second largest city in the north of England. It's quite close to Manchester. It's a little bit further north than Birmingham, and it's a really beautiful city. It's got a perfect blend of the city life, but also a really majestic kind of natural aura and feel to it as well. Very historic. So it's got a lot of character in the city, which I'm really enjoying. There's a heavy Muslim population as well, so you're never short of a halal butcher. Alhamdulillah, my contract here is starting 1st of April, which is just before Shahr Ramadan, inshallah. So I've got a little bit of time to myself to get to know the community. That's being done, you know, at arm's length because of lockdown. So a lot of the conversations between ourselves and the community, or the wider Leeds faith-based community, that's being done on Zoom as well. So it's a tragedy that we can't meet face-to-face with some of the faith leaders at the moment. But you know, alhamdulillah, we're getting settled in, getting to know the area, getting to know the people. My life is not as exciting as Neil's, clearly. You know, we don't have goats and sheep just next to us here, a little bit further away. But I think during my time, because I've got some time, you know, continuing studies is important. So trying to crack on with that during the mornings, and then the afternoons continuing some writing. So we're hopefully publishing a couple of works in the next couple of months, inshallah, or the coming months. One work that we've been doing is a translation of Hayatun Tayyibah by Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Taqi al-Mudarrisi. There's a chapter in there which is called Fiqh al-Ta'am, which is kind of like the depth of the spirituality and the economy of food. So that's coming out, inshallah, with a commentary. And I'm also writing something on how to do tadabbur of Quran. So we finished the first section. There's 3 sections to the book. The first section is kind of all the theoretical debates, permissibility of tadabbur of Quran by a non-ma'soom. You know, what is the difference between tadabbur, tafakkur, and ta'ammul? These sort of theoretical discussions. The second section of the book is going to be on prerequisites. what are the requisites that someone has to do before doing tadabbur of Quran. Some of them are wajib, some of them are recommended. And then the third section, inshallah, will be 15 techniques on how to do tadabbur of Quran with practical exercises. The idea is that a student of the Quran will practice the first technique, master it, and then move on to the second and third and so on and so forth. So trying to keep busy, but obviously isolating a lot, as in can't really meet up with people unless necessary. So opportunities like this, when they come, it's great to be able to speak to everyone.
Alhamdulillah, thank you so much. There's a lot of things you mentioned which we want to get into a bit later, but I feel like we're getting like less and less rural. So from Zanzibar to Leeds to New York. Sh.Faiyaz, assalamu alaikum. How is the situation across the pond?
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. It's okay. Alhamdulillah. Can't complain. We're a lot more privileged than a lot of other folks, as Neil mentioned, the challenges that, individuals in East Africa and otherwise are facing right now. Being at home with heat in the massive snowstorm that I'm sitting in right now, having a roof over my head, having, food and water and a job. Even in this city, in New York City, the food shortage issues and the homelessness in the middle of the cold, in the middle of the pandemic, in the middle of sort of a whole overhaul in government apparatus, has really inflicted so many a unique challenge on on members of the community more broadly, of the community in New York City, in the Muslim community as well. So alhamdulillah, God is great. Very, very blessed and very privileged.
Alhamdulillah. And work-wise, I imagine all of your education must be digital by now, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm employed by New York University. It is the beginning of the semester, the beginning of the new academic semester started last Thursday. So the courses that I teach as a professor on Tuesdays, and then I take I'm also a doctoral student, so I take classes on, twice a week in the evenings. Everything currently is virtual. There are a couple of courses that do meet on campus in person, though distanced, but none of the ones that I participate in at all. And our interaction also is limited. So, it's overwhelmingly virtual. And likewise, to echo, Sh.Jaffer's sentiment, is nice to see some friendly faces, so to say, on camera. To have some sort of social interaction is super important because things can get kind of sad and depressing. But I'm definitely not doing anything as amazing and as unique as these two. And let me just say this, that Neil, you're incredible, man. Like every single time you speak, I feel like I get, like I have chills in my bones because of the conviction that you speak with and the sincerity that you speak with. And it's not everyone, who just decides that I'm going to like leave my normal life and go and volunteer for 3 months or for 6 months or for 12 months. And every time that I sit with you over the last several years and that we've conversed, and every time that we've done these things, really, you're so inspirational, man. So God bless you for all of your efforts, really. I thought I'd just throw that out there.
Ameen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I've had good teachers, Sh.Jaffer, Sh.Jaffer, Ladak, my teachers. You guys are the ones that instill the love of the Ahlul Bayt into my heart. And we listen, actively listen, and we act upon the actions, and we try to mimic the footsteps of the Ahlul Bayt. We look at the humanitarian problems around the world and we ask ourselves a simple question: what can we do? What difference can we make? We live our comfortable lives sometimes, and I'd like to try to make a difference where I can. I mean, it's like I said at the beginning, I'm a coach. I'm a life coach. I'm trying to, start my own business, life solutions business, and I should practice what I preach, right? If I set a proper goal and set a proper plan, things can happen. And I'm just an individual. I'm just a human being. I'm fallible like everybody else, and anyone else can do things that I'm doing. Just got to get out there and just do it, make that plan and make that change. Everyone has the ability to do it. It's just that self-belief and that drive to know that, you can make the change. The funny conversation when I rang the villa manager, the foundation manager, I said, I'm not a teacher, so what can I do? What difference can I do? And he said to me something so profound. He said to me, can you add 2 plus 2? And I said, yeah, 2 plus 2 is 4. He said, right, you can teach. I mean, it's that simple. We scared of being able to stand up in front of a class to teach what English or something, but you've got to realize that their English is so basic that even my simple Cockney dialect is able to kind of influence people in certain ways. So, alhamdulillah, thank you so much for your comments. Honestly, it's embarrassing to hear.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Neil's story is quite different to anyone I've ever met, and the way that he's got here is quite distinct, and it does prove that you can kind of carve your own way. I wonder, when I speak to both of you, Agha Jaffer, Agha Faiyaz, when you guys were studying back in Hausa, was teaching one of like your motivations, that this education is knowledge is for me, certainly, and for my own understanding, but was one of the motivations that I have to bring something back to the UK, to New York? Was that an active motivation for you guys?
Go ahead, Sheikh. Go ahead.
Please.
For me, initially, I don't think that it was. I saw it more as an opportunity for me to individually develop and really carve out, my role in relation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as, being the best of servants. Allahumma jalni min ahsani abidika nasiban indik wa aqrabihim manzilatan mink, as Imam Ali says in Dua Kumail. We're a slave, right? We're a servant of the Creator. And I thought for me to fulfill my responsibility to him, I had this, interest and this desire to learn, and I don't think that sort of escaped me in any way. But then also, as you kind of sit in the seminary and as you kind of think about responsibility that comes with whatever little, kind of like Neil said, 2 plus 2 equals 4. All of a sudden, that sort of transforms into responsibility for those who don't know 2 plus 2 equals 4. That's not to sort of speak in a hierarchical way about, folks and members of our community. Please, anyone who knows me, hopefully doesn't, take that as an arrogant statement or anything, but as an opportunity rather to learn, and as much as we learn, or as much as, members of the community learn from religious leadership, I would actually flip that and say that I probably have learned so much more from being in service of community than people actually realize. I say this quite often, that the best teachers that I've ever had are my children, right? So they may know less than me in terms of what are in textbooks, but their active lifestyles have taught me more about my Creator and about my responsibilities to God more than anything else. And being around people, being around community in a preaching or in a teaching sort of phase, or even as I lecture at the university, I learn so much from the questions of the students and from their experiences that, like, I don't see it as, I'm the teacher and they're my students, or I'm the educator and these are the ones who are seeking education from me. Rather, I see it all as a learning experience, And I think that's really, really humbling about the lifelong journey of learning and of reading and of studying. It never ends, right? And it's always something that there's always more room for growth.
Sh.Jaffer, thoughts?
What a beautiful answer. I've got nothing to add to that. Beautiful. Just keep the audience's heart on that answer, because there's nothing better that I could say.
Do you have a relationship with the people that engage with your work that kind of sustains you in that same way? Do you get that feedback, and what do you do with it? Abu Ja'far, for you, because I know how much you're lecturing and teaching and the fellowship you get. How do you engage with that type of response to your research?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's really interesting because you have to kind of differentiate between those. You have kind of, in this modern world, the social media model, and I think you have to be able to separate that model from the reality that exists out there. Social media model is where people end up DMing you their personal problems. They'll want to reach out to someone. They hope someone has a ready ear. And from that perspective, of course, it's wonderful to be able to assist people however you can. But actually the development, or what you wish to be able to do over a journey with people, is to help them develop systematically. And that's why I prefer to have a series of discussions. And at the end of it, what you find is you'll always find individual students who shine out. They're looking for something more. And what they want for you to do is to help them, not to give them the answers, but to help them how to think, how to be able to have a methodology in their approach to reading a book, to reading the Quran, to assessing the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I think sometimes you have to be able to learn to be able to differentiate the two, the general target audience, and then those people whom you were able to see and develop more specifically. So I think that's what I personally end up looking for. And I think that's when I feel like a series has been a success, where someone you never have imagined would have contacted you and said, I listened to it, thank you so much, this was beneficial because A, B, and C. Or can you help us to be able to find a book that will help me to develop in this angle of the discussion that you were speaking about? And that's when you set them off on their own path. They develop further than what you could ever help them to do. So I think that's what I personally hope out of some of the discussions that we end up having.
When you're lecturing or when you're giving a course, and I've been there, you often have like an engagement with the audience where you can see how they're reacting to an idea. You can sometimes when you're lecturing on an idea a little bit, you can see in their eyes if the point goes in their heart or not. And then you know exactly what point will set them on the journey and where they need to go, especially if you've been there. When you're doing these Zoom lectures and you're doing these courses, how do how do we cover that? How do we fill in that gap and continue that productive type of education that we want, especially when it's a screen you're talking to?
Neil mentioned earlier on about different types of education, and he's hoping to just introduce and broaden the experience of education. He mentioned, for example, there's the kinesthetic learning, where people are physically touching and involved in the learning that they're doing. So if you notice from the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, they encourage kinesthetic learning. And there's a great deal of encouragement of mubahatha and revision. So I'll give you a couple of examples of the ahadith, and then we utilize these in the series that we do. So for example, hadith from our sixth Imam as-Sadiq, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh, he's narrated to have said, whoever reads the Quran from its pages, Allah lightens the punishment of his parents. تُخَفِّفُ الْعَذَابِ وَلَوْ كَانَ كَافِرَيْنِ, even if they are disbelievers. So what I tend to try to do is encourage the audience from the outset to have the Quran with them, to open up the pages that we're going to be discussing, they have it in their hands. And the idea behind this is not just for it to be a monologue. I'll encourage them to take a pen and to annotate their Qurans. So whatever we're talking about, whatever you're thinking through and feeling, note the different ayat that we're going to talk about, make your comments on the Quran, you'll always be able to refer back to it. So this is one. A second thing we try to do is encourage homework. Even in pulpit lectures that I tend to give, Neil will know, I'll say, this is your homework for tonight. Thursday night lectures, Friday khutbah, go away, this is the one point. I want you to research this. I want you to think about this one point. So actually, I have a lot of people then that will submit the homework to me. And that's important as well, because then I get to review it, read it, see what level they're thinking at. So that's from another hadith. For example, the Imam alayhi salam is narrated to have said that 1 hour's worth of revision of knowledge is even superior to 70 years of worship. So if you take these two ahadith and you think about them from an educational perspective and try to implement them into the work that we're doing, this is some of the practicality that we're trying to do. And I don't think it's just because of Zoom. You need to do this in every type of educational setting that we're engaged with. Islamic studies, or the speaking around Islamic studies, has to improve. It has to develop. And I think that those who are privileged enough to be able to reflect on Islam and teach matters of Islam have to be at the forefront of that change.
Faiyaz, that idea applying to you, what have you learned about the level of the community that you're working with based on their engagement with your ideas or with the source material? I don't know if you set homework in the same way, but because you mentioned before, you learn as much as you give. So how are the people? what can we gauge about the general understanding of our community?
If someone shows up, they expect to learn, right? And you know, it's important that we meet them kind of where they're at. People are naturally going to have different capacities to learn. They're at different age you know, they're within different age demographics. They have different experiences. I think as Sh.Jaffer mentioned earlier, people are going through a lot of things in their life, and sometimes they're looking to heal by means of what it is that they learn, you know. And all we can do, or I speak for myself, all I can do is hopefully give them a little bit of that inspiration while they're in presence. And number two, realize that I have to put in my best effort, you know, every single time that I'm going to sit in front of my students in a university lecture, or in front of, you know, the members of my community at the mosque or the Sainiya or the Islamic Center or whatever it might be. Because if you're present, you know, you seek to learn. And that's a privilege that I have at that moment, to be the one, you know, sitting at the pulpit, or the teacher in the front of the classroom, or whatever it might be. And you know, at the end of the day, I have to meet people where they're at, to spend time with learning what their needs are. I have to be very, very clear about the objectives. Very similar to Sh.Jaffer, most of my sort of talks week to week are on commentary of the Quran, and I ask people to make sure that they have the Quran in front of them, that they're annotating their copy of the Quran, or if they don't have place in the margins, then to keep a notebook, you know, next to them, and to go back and to review what we spoke about. But at the same time, also reflect and ponder, you know, on their own, and then prior to the next, you know, week, you know, have them, you know, in that same state of preparation. And what is so unique for me in terms of my learning experience is actually hearing what everyone spoke about, or thought about, or reflected about prior to the next lesson. You know, it's not something that I'll just take for, you know, I'll see it in my email inbox, or I'll have a conversation and just be like, okay, well, this is what I'm going to say. You know, one of the unique qualities of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the fact that, you know, the people of Mecca, as mentioned in chapter 9 of the Quran, would be critical of the Prophet alayhi salam, and state, you know, huwa udhunun, you know, that he's an ear, he's all ears. All this guy does is listen. He's the Prophet of God, he's the Messenger of God, right? He's supposed to be leading us, he's supposed to be speaking, he's supposed to be commanding, and all he does is listen. How can he be a prophet? You know, what it actually shows is the incredible accessibility of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we have, you know, an abundance of ahadith and you know, stories and anecdotes within the life of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that someone sees him, and the way that he would talk to, you know, this elderly woman, and the way that he would sit with the young child, seemingly talking about things that, you know, a head of state, as a messenger of God, would not be engaging and dealing with. But if we're not truly walking in the footsteps of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then we're doing something like really incredibly wrong. And I think breaking down those barriers is what is so unique and what is so lovable about the Messenger and his family alayhim salam. They were relatable to their community. They sat with people, they engaged them in unique ways. And I think that you know, I have a ways to go, of course, toward emulating. We have to keep on trying and striving. And I think that that's where I have the opportunity to learn individually from all of those around me. You know, teaching, learning, whatever it may be, in either one of those frames.
One of the areas that I'm teaching the teachers is to be an effective communicator. So I run like a course that it's broken down into 9 segments, 9 key areas to be an effective communicator. The first section being active listening, because if we don't listen, then we're nowhere really. Unfortunately, most people listen to respond, not listen to understand. So we spend quite a heavy part of the course on listening. But the second part is about non-verbal communication. It's about body language. And there's interesting theory that I kind of came across, and I use it within the training, that when you're communicating, only 7% of what you're delivering is your words. 7% is what lands. So you could be saying literally anything, repeating yourself over and over again in a very simplistic way. 38% of it is your tone of voice. So it's how you change your pitches and how you express yourself. But 55% is your body language. 55% of what you're actually communicating across is how you communicate it. And you can apply that whether you're face to face with somebody, whether you're on Zoom, whether you're in a Skype meeting, or whether you're on actually just a telephone where no one can actually see you. People say, how do you do it when you're on the telephone? Well, you still, your body's speaking, and your body will change your tone of voice as you're moving. So I think it's vitally important that this is applied when, you know, these two legends are giving lectures as well. When you see them on Zoom, you see their bodies moving, you see their arms moving, you see them actually engaging with the audience as well, because they are engaging with people and they're probably looking at people on the screen. So you just be very adaptable. You know, at the moment I'm dealing with children, so I find that sort of lowering myself to their level, speaking on their terms, kneeling down even, and just speaking to them at eye level, you can get a very good response that way. You're not sort of having this hierarchy presence about them.
Famous saying says, motion creates emotion.
Thank you.
You move around, it will actually conduct that emotion into people.
There you go. Is that something which you have applied in your lectures in getting people's engaging with you or getting people listening? Yeah.
Most of mine are boring and people fall asleep in, but Sh.Faiyaz is very animated.
I'm just trying to keep up with you, with both of you guys right now. So I'm trying to animate myself a little bit extra, you know.
Neil is the perfect replacement for coffee. Just have a bout of Neil and you're up and running, man.
We call it kahawa, not coffee. We're changing it to Swahili now. It's kahawa. But no, it's just about relating and you know, thinking about when you're delivering on a flat screen to an audience, about actually interacting, moving around, moving your shoulders, moving your hands, giving those gestures, changing your facial, you know, your face speaks 1,000 words. You know, if we're smiling, we smile with our eyes, we smile with our cheekbones, we smile with our jaw. You know, when we frown, we really, you know, we can really frown and people can see that. And it's just about having that presence of mind that when you're delivering and you want to engage your audience, it's literally about thinking about your body, just sitting there very still. Generally, you're not going to get the best response from the audience.
Neil, I need one of these trainings, man, if you don't mind.
We'll talk offline, yeah. Don't worry.
Let me know what the cost factor is, and we'll, inshallah, unless you're going to volunteer for me. You volunteer for everyone else, maybe.
Why not?
Hey, wait, I should get a finder's fee for this podcast, right? I mean, if there's money going around, we've all got hands out.
I'm just thinking about this coffee idea, that Neil's coffee, and obviously with that tan, he's gone from white sugar to brown sugar.
We can make a lot of money if we really pull these ideas in a productive way. Anywhere
there we go.
Help us do it, you know.
It's just good lighting, Jaffer. It's just very good lighting.
We don't have the same lighting, clearly. Sheikh is by a window.
He's just showing off the snow.
Middle of a snowstorm, guys. Struggling over here.
I think my window's probably the best window if we're comparing. You know.
Looks like it.
Yeah, it's true. You're in the church, right?
Yeah. I'm living in a church. It's like it's a very strange place to live. But I've been here for nearly 9 months now. I moved because of lockdown, and in my job I have to work with people, and my parents were shielding at the time. And it was easier to work, but it's really a church they made into apartments. And so, you know, you have these large halls and my room is filled with these stained glass windows. It's very like powerful. So when I'm giving a meeting, right, and I have this mic in the background, like it's very, you know, effective way of putting a point across. And my employers have noticed this actually. Neil helped me a lot with my job.
Into the conversation.
Huh?
It's a good way to bring Isa alayhi salam into the conversation.
That is true. And I gave a lecture on Jesus' birth, and I had this as the background. It was very, very forceful. And then I did it for children, and I made them paint it. And because we were discussing kids earlier, I found that if we're giving knowledge, we have to kind of change the way that we give. And I changed it from doing a tafsir session to doing an art session. So the kids, they come and they bring materials in front of them. It's a closed session so that they can speak openly. And while I'm going through the story, I'm giving them details, you know, the sea was really blue, and they start drawing it, and then they write the verse of Quran or the message on it. And we have had to kind of change. We all mention kids. Is it just me, or is there like a very special relationship between the Holy Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt and children? Sometimes it feels like they felt more happy and at ease giving knowledge to children than even the masses who didn't even want to understand them sometimes. It's true, right?
Kids are
Children,
receptive.
children are just pure, aren't they? They're just pure. They just say it how it is. There's no barriers. They haven't been affected by the world, if you like. So they'll tell you. I think they have that a closer connection to God than we even know. Sometimes they will just say it how it is, literally. And like Sh.Faiyaz was saying, he's learned so much from having children himself and looking how the children respond and how they play and how creative they are. I think as we grow older, we limit ourselves with barriers in our own minds. I think we fill our heads with words that I can't and I won't, and I'm not able to do that but at that age, up to the age of 7 or so, we've got this freedom, and yeah, it's good. I love being around kids. Really great.
What I have probably learned more from my children than anything else is this idea of like reflection. Right? We talk about closeness to God and spirituality and so on. That curiosity that children have due to their receptivity. When a child asks questions, they, especially at a certain age, around 3 years old or so, they're consistently asking why questions. Why is the sky blue? Why is this red? Why is this thing? Why is that? They ask all these crazy questions, and they're never sufficed with whatever you give them. So what parents normally do, I'm guilty of this as well, is we try to just divert the conversation away because I don't know how to answer their question anymore. And what I actually see is that their innate nature is drawing them to just curiosity, and it's like, wait a minute, why have I stopped asking those questions? Why have I stopped asking why is the sky blue? My younger daughter, for instance, she's 3.5. I have 2 girls, 5.5 and 3.5. Make dua for them, Zainab and Maryam. That she's obsessed with the moon, obsessed. Every time at night she looks out at looks outside the window just so she can see the moon, and she now has started to recognize that there's a pattern. Sometimes the moon is not as big as it normally is. Sometimes the moon is very small, and she gets so excited. Baba, look at the moon. Moon, look at the moon. She gets so excited. And again, we don't even pay attention to that, but it gets me to sort of remember and realize that this is exactly what our tradition teaches us. How many times does the Quran say, did we not create the heavens and the earth? Alam tara, do you not see the moon and the stars and the sun and the oceans and the rivers and the trees and all of these things? They're all the signs of God. They're all meant to draw us closer to God. Sanurihim ayatina fil afaq. That God has presented and put on display all of these things so that we think, so that we reflect, right? And really, I'm before I had children, probably was the most distant from being someone who enjoyed nature. Much more comfortable like reading a book and drinking my cup of coffee than like looking up. And now I realize that no matter how much I read, no matter how much I write, no matter how much I spend time with people and studying or whatever my other interests are, there is no moment where you feel that sense of closeness with the Creator, like when you are literally fulfilling what God has asked us to do in the Quran, and what the Hadith literature emphasizes so much, which is to contemplate and reflect on all of these things. And so yes, children are so pure, they're so receptive, they're looking to learn, and they're not looking to respond like we tend to be. So certainly there's a lot to be learned. Sorry for taking so much time. It's not my intention, not my style.
It's great. Looking up at the stars, I touched on it earlier on here. The skies are so clear, and we just had the middle of the month, the full moons just came out, and you go out to the ocean. Alhamdulillah, I'm lucky to have ocean just there near us, and you can see the direct correlation that the moon affects, how it affects the ocean, and you just have to say subhanallah, because phenomenal, how the Creator has created this realm, this universe, the stars above us, the moon, the heavens, and then that direct correlation to how the equilibrium, 70% of the planet is water, and how the full moon comes out and just changes everything. Like the stillness of that night was unreal, the eeriness as well, and then all the animals as well were very silent. It was just serenity, and it's total submission, it's total yaqeen. At that point, you just have to raise your hands and know, you know, he's there. He's at that jugular vein at that point, and you know he's there. And that pulse that you can feel in that jugular vein is him pulling on you and saying, you know what, I'm here for you. You know, wherever you are, I'm here. And your eyes, I talk a lot in the West about the third eye, opening up that third eye. I think, you know, places like this, or places when you're looking up at the sky, or having that moments of reflection, or taking the time to meditate before Salah, just breathing and taking the time to ground yourself. I think that you can connect yourself even more than just reading and just reciting or just listening to majalis. You know, it's actually getting yourself in tune to the Creator, and know that you are just a creation of that being.
You gave a lot of examples. I wonder, Sh.Jaffer, why is it important people attach their relationship to nature with their relationship to God? Why is it important that that is a part of their spirituality?
In our aqa'id texts, there's a discussion on the best way to be able to prove the Creator, or, for example, how to be able to have a relationship with the Creator. And sometimes what we do is we take from the creation in order to be able to prove the Creator. At other times, we utilize the Creator to be able to prove the Creator. Both of these are mentioned in the Quran as methodologies. There's actually a big debate amongst the mutakallimin, amongst the theologians and the philosophers, as to which way is the best. For example, Ibn Sina, he absolutely hammers home the idea of the importance of being able to prove the Creator through the Creator himself. And that is absolutely afdal over proving Creator from creation. But both are mentioned in the Quran. So, for example, Sh.Faiyaz just mentioned, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask you, do you not see? Do you not take time to observe, to take time to consider? أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبِلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ? You know, do you not take time to consider how the camel was created, and so on and so forth? All of these things, and focusing on yourself, as Sheikh mentioned the ayah where Allah will show you his signs in the horizon and in your own selves. These are ways to be able to prove and to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the fact that this has been mentioned as a methodology, as an argument by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself, it should be that everybody tries to take time out, as Sheikh mentioned, to lift up their head and just to be able to look out, take time to the self. Then comes the importance of silence. And in our modern day context, that is as simple as just putting the phone away. You know, we're just inundated by all of these radio waves that are just hitting us with all of this information constantly. Every app is constantly giving me a different notification. The opportunity to put the phone away and everything else, just be a bit silent, and just to be able to go outside, just breathe and take in nature, and to just talk to God. This will probably do more for many people than so many other forms of ibadat, because those ibadat are wrapped up in the technology. I've got to leave the phone, I've got to rush back to the phone, I've got to rush back to the Zoom meeting. If you can actually use creation to be able to get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you've actually done something great. The Quran says that as an outcome of you utilizing creation to know God, you should come to certain conclusions. Rabbana ma khalaqta hadha batala. You've not created any of this in vain. And you can learn that through seeing the system of God. Right? Farji' al-basar karratain, the Quran says. You know, look again. Just try to become you become fatigued at trying to find a mistake or an incongruity in this creation. So this is why there's so much emphasis on creation to creator.
What one could be forgiven, well, not forgiven for taking it so theoretically and thinking you need to be away from society and you live in nature and be enveloped by it in order to have this. But the truth is, you can have that in a modern city, you can have that in a Western city. You just need to take it seriously. I can't think of a more modern place than New York City. Fayyad, when you know, yourself and people that you're with how do you carve out spaces for spirituality when you're in a place where that force that Jaffer is mentioning is so overpowering around you? How do you carve out that space for nature, space for yourself, space for silence, and space for tafakkur?
I know for many it might sound outrageous for me to say that is it's incredibly difficult to do so. You know, for someone in Zanzibar right now, for them to think about, you know, finding space to remember God in a place like New York City, like why wouldn't you be able to find God anywhere? Really, this world is very deceptive. You know, لا تغرنكم الحياة الدنيا. And you know, New York City, like any other large sort of urban, you know, city, is so filled with things, so filled with buildings, so filled with, you know, places to go and restaurants to eat, and you know, and I'll tell you what you know, one of those things that have really driven home a lot of perspective, you know, is living like in this pandemic, right? It's really, you know, for those of you who are like following the news, especially last year, in you know, at the beginning of the pandemic, in, you know, February, March, April, the number of like mortalities that we had in New York, but 30,000, you know, in the course of a couple of weeks. And you know, I just remember even in our community, the way that it was inflicted. I tell people this all the time, that, you know, during the month of Ramadan, I was attending so many funerals and hearing about so many deaths that I remember how vividly like my dreams were of me drowning in dead bodies. It was like that. It was really horrific. The amount of sort of mortality that we saw, I can't even explain it. That said, I think that, you know, a lot of those sorts of experiences help put things in perspective for so many people, because realize like, oh, this is not what life is about, right? You know, and in a city where it's all about keeping up with the Joneses, so to say, right? It's like where you live and where you eat and how you dress and how much money you make and, you know, how much money you're investing and so on and so forth. You can get lost in all. Anyone can get lost in that, you know? It could be from the one who is sort of lower on the socioeconomic pole to the one who is higher, because you're always trying to sort of, you know, see where you are on the charts, so to say. And you get so deceived again by everything that is around. That said, you know, this experience has been really positive, I think, in centering a lot of people's minds. But I think that's also the need. It also has demonstrated the need prior to and certainly thereafter about the role of religious spaces, you know, of mosques and Islamic centers. You know, we talk a lot about, and I hear it and I understand it 100%, you know, like we don't need to be building so many more mosques. We don't need all of these Islamic centers. Let's just, you know, like transition, you know, things onto like, you know, a Zoom format, or, you know, we need to like continue to build out, you know, online platforms. I agree with all of those things, right? But there's also a need for physical space for what it really does and what it really helps to ground people in. I receive emails every single day from members of the community saying like, we have not like prayed since, you know, whatever, since we like, you know, have been in this lockdown because we're not around people. There's like a benefit of being in community, you know? This is like why we have this emphasis on ummah within our tradition, within the ayat of the Quran and so on and so forth. So it is really challenging. It is really difficult, but it starts with that, making that first effort, you know, it starts with making that first effort, sort of re-envisioning, you know, our roles and our objectives. What are we here for? What you know, where am I going? Where did I come from? And I think when we ask ourselves those questions, oftentimes in the midst of trials and tribulations, it really helps sort of inject that spirituality back into our hearts. And sometimes, you know, it's important to just get away from the city. We try to encourage that a lot. Right now, it's obviously a lot more difficult and challenging because people can't travel. But something that I would always tell my community is to sort of step away once in a while, even if it's just for a couple of hours. Go to the suburbs, go to the farm, go to the mountains, you know, it's really important.
And in that private space that we have, one of, I guess, the advantages of the online is more people are more connected because of technology and social media and Zoom and all that stuff. And I'm
There's
seeing
also a lot more burnout though, right?
But then that's the flip side. So we're connected, but we become so jaded by the platform that it kind of hurts. And when you have to do it for work, fine. But when in your social life, people's relationships are kind of getting hurt a little bit, you know, by this. Have you guys noticed the kind of declining mental health in people around you? It seems more powerful than I've ever noticed it before. I don't know if you've seen the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. With the clients that I'm working with through coaching and mentoring, it does seem to be that people are really struggling. Um, you know, that they're presenting stuff sometimes that I can't help them with, and I'm have to refer them on to therapists or counselors. Um, and quite interestingly, you know, I'm working with people now that are trying to set goals around spiritualness, trying to find closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's quite incredible. I'm working with, don't like to talk too much about the clients that I work with to keep confidentiality, but I recently have started working with a new client, and this person is just at the verge of setting their first goal. So we've kind of hashed out quite a few things, and their first goal is around connecting to God. How do they connect to God? How do they bring back that spirituality in their life? And I was so sort of taken aback by that. Majority of people are always focused on their careers, their financial aspects, their relationships, but this particular person wants to talk about how do they connect to God. And for myself, I know that if you're connecting to God and you're increasing your awareness of the Creator, everything else kind of falls into place, right? Because you take one step towards Him, He's going to take 10 steps towards you. If you're giving more charity, more comes back to you. So everything just kind of rolls into this place. You know, having struggling with issues with this lockdown. I know that my son, I use my son as an example. I'm sure he won't mind. He's having to come away from university environment and do online learning, and he feels that he's missing out on a lot of things. He was part of that year group that wasn't able to kind of have that farewell at school when he completed his A levels at sixth form level, and then he started his university life at university. Then it was quickly go home. There's coronavirus, and his studying is just in his bedroom. He's not interacting with people. And I think that most of his peers, most of the people I'm speaking to as well, are all feeling the same. Everyone's homeworking. In fact, to use me as an example, I was homeworking. I was working for a housing association, managing contact centers from home. And during the first lockdown, I found it really difficult, working long hours, having major burnout, working 8, 9, 10 hours a day on the computer, then sort of trying to have a social life on the computer via Zoom and all other platforms that we're using, you know, which led me to sort of sit back and reflect and think about how can I make this great escape to Zanzibar, right? This is where I am right now. So it is going to have effect, and they have a long-term effect as well. We're not even going to see the long-term effect for maybe 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 years from now, how this is going to change society.
I find it hard for the same reason. You know, my client, most of my clients I'm working with in the legal field are either homeless, they're actively rough sleeping, or they're refugees somewhere in the European Balkan route, and they need some support on the way. And how do you have that kind of professionalism in a place which is your home and your safety? Like, it's such a, you need to really make a decision that this is work time and this is not work time. And when it comes to people's lives and those stakes, you know, it does become hard. And I guess that's why it was important to move. This thing about we're noticing more homelessness, we're noticing more people suffering, whether it's mental health or physical health. Is this here to last, or is this a symptom of the system we're in? I mean, let's try and arrange these things in their context. COVID happened, but are we now seeing a bit more about the system we had always lived in but had never been able to see? I wonder what you guys think about that.
I think we've seen sort of an exasperation and amplification of the systemic problems, right? That have already plagued our communities. I give you an example: a board member, an active volunteer of a project here in New York City called Pillars of Peace, where we have, alhamdulillah, built out, I believe, the first domestic violence shelter for Muslim women and children over the past couple of years, and it's soon to open, hopefully in the next several months. And in our, in my work with survivors of domestic violence, women and children in our community, the circumstances that they've had to live through have been that much more amplified, due to stay-at-home orders. How can you live with someone who is, physically, spiritually, financially abusing you, mentally, abusing you on a day-to-day basis? Imagine sort of what that stress level, what that, hardship for that individual who is the victim of that abuse does, in the midst of the pandemic, and then where do they go? And if they leave, like, do they have a home? Do they have a home for themselves? Do they have a home for their children? Can they afford food, groceries, water, all of these things, And like what it does is it demonstrates like how dire, circumstances in our communities, truly are. We talk about things like homelessness, like I know that you guys work on, I had mentioned it earlier as well in the beginning of the conversation. People are going through a whole load of stuff. And if this experience has not been at the very least eye-opening, the disparity economically, socially, socioeconomically, in the Western world, how, the wealthy continue to get wealthier in spite of everything, and those who are on the fringes and isolated and marginalized continue to get further isolated and marginalized. And the only thing that we do is just become aware of it without any sort of real action, without any sort of real change. Then we need to like really take a step back and kind of think about like, what are we doing? Like, who are we? Am I a human being? Forget if I'm a believer or not. Am I a human being to not care about these issues at the very least? And I would say that, alhamdulillah, on the positive light of it all, I know our center in the last, year or so, in the last 6 months, has raised $2.5 million in supporting, members of the community who are struggling to pay their rent, survivors of domestic violence or otherwise, to purchase groceries. And we just released a new campaign a couple of weeks ago. Maybe just to plug this out there, I can share the link with you all. Maybe you guys can share it with your respective contacts, towards supporting families who are struggling to pay their day-to-day expenses in light of the pandemic. And I think we released a sort of crowdfunding page about a month ago, and we're already at $350,000, and hopefully we get to 1 million in that one as well. There are a lot of people who are willing to give, right? There are a lot of people who are showing, their efforts to sort of step up and make those differences and make those changes, which is a really incredible blessing. But there's that much need for more, right? Because it hurts, right? It hurts to see what our sisters and brothers, whether they're believers, in the same religious tradition or not, as us or not, it doesn't matter. People are being impacted every single day, and we need to sort of live those prophetic values on a day-to-day basis, and at the very least do something as simple as typing in a couple of numbers of our credit card information and submitting a link, or doing like the work that Neil is doing, and literally going on the streets and delivering. And really, I can't say, Sh.Jaffer, I'm sure you're going to agree with me, this guy could like speak all day and I would never get tired, it's really, really inspirational every time. And
he would come over to the house, and we'd be up till 5, 6 in the morning, and just listening to everything that he's got to tell us. So
it's unbelievable.
Yeah, wonderful. Unbelievable. Both of you guys have picked up on something so important. So you had the fatigue conversation, the Zoom fatigue conversation, and then Sh.Faiyaz is talking about there's been cracks in society, and the pandemic has only just widened them, or rather allowed people to see the realities of those cracks in the system. There's a really phenomenal lecture. I'll humbly recommend it to the audience if they want to take time out to listen to it. It's available on YouTube, from Dr. Stephen Davis. He is the head of education for the Institute of Economic Affairs. And there is an annual lecture, which is called the Hayek Lecture. Hayek was Nobel Prize winning economist, and he actually has certain theories, epistemic theories on dealing with pandemics. It's called spontaneous order theory. So anyway, Dr. Davis is speaking about Hayekian theory and how to apply these principles into a pandemic. And there's a number of important points that he brings up that kind of hopefully adds to the conversation that's being had. And he asks certain questions about, what has the pandemic taught us? What will the future world look like? So I'll mention a couple of these for us to be able to think through kind of the points that have already been made. As an example, he asks, what has the pandemic taught us? And he says that one of the things we can see is that our economy is over-optimized. It's not built for any sudden surge or any sudden shift. And the moment there is, it can't cope with it. And this has been an example of what we're facing. So many millions of people are out of work. And what does that mean? Not only for the economy, I mean, not just only on a GDP sense, that we're looking at it, this conversation is mental health, well-being, the rights of a human being. So when you base your economy on, for example, GDP as the measurement, you're going to go to one outcome of thought. When you base your economy on lifestyle, or for example, on the development, the human development factors, you're immediately going to come out with a different set of economic measurements. This pandemic has showed us the fault. When I say fault, I mean like the fault that lies underneath the earth, and there's actually a tectonic shift that's occurring in front of us. He's also mentioned you can see the decline, what we're seeing from the pandemic, the public discourse, that there is a decline on discussions or emphasis around public health. We've attenuated ourselves to having discussions around individual health. And that's obviously following a capitalistic model. You go to the gym, you look after yourself. You make sure that you go to Whole Foods and you make sure that you personally eat kale and whatever greens you can, right? That's important. But in a pandemic, no amount of personal health is going to assist you, because anyone at any point in time can get this particular disease or any disease in a pandemic, and it can cripple you, right? We're seeing, as Sh.Faiyaz mentioned earlier, the mortality rate in front of him just exponentially grew, and it's a grim thing when you're having to bury bodies every day, right? So the conversation needs to shift away from a capitalistic style of health to a public discussion of health. So these are the kind of things that are being exposed in front of us. And that's when you bring in the conversations around homelessness, around domestic violence and the level of increase, abuse, child abuse has gone up 30%. We've seen that in statistics here. So that's one conversation. The other conversation goes back to what you asked earlier on about this loneliness that is occurring on Zoom. And one of the things that Dr. Davis talks about is the future world. And he says what we're going to see now is, because more and more of us are proving that we don't have to do the commute to get to work. We can work from home. It's going to become a lifestyle change where more and more of us are going to work from home even after the pandemic finishes. Pandemics usually last between 18 to 24 months, let alone now when we're beginning to globalize a vaccine. So at the end of the 24-month cycle of whatever we're facing, there will still be a large majority of employers and employees that want people to work from home. That's when we have to really reorganize our lifestyle, because as we stated, you need to be able to differentiate between your 8-hour work day and your family time and your personal time. So what does this mean in terms of changing of work and life patterns, a shortening of supply chains? All of these are questions that need to occur. And then he says another important point. He says, we have been duped into a certain dialogue. And this is very important. I think we all need to be preaching this point. What we've been hearing from the media is that this is a once in 100-year event. Have you heard that? Once in a century event. The last major pandemic was the influenza, the Spanish flu. Nonsense. Actually, we've had 24 pandemics between the 1800s and date, which means that we actually have a pandemic every 10 to 20 years. If you take it as every 10 years, if every year is a 1 in 10 chance of another pandemic. Now that's really important to understand, because what we realize is the reason as to why this pandemic started, and I don't mean it from a theological perspective, right? There was a jump of a disease between species to species, probably to a bat. We humans were taking from foodstuffs which are makruh and haram, and they're haram and makruh for a reason in Islam, and we were eating things that were makruh and haram for us in Wuhan. That has jumped between species. It means that the more we continue to be able to we break the rainforest, or we continue to enter into places that we're not supposed to enter, that are protected species, the more we're going to continue to have potentiality of more and more pandemics. Professor Davis says that the next pandemic, the likelihood is going to be from the types of newly grown pathogens that are living with each other in the industrial farming that we're doing. The amount of cows and sheep and chicken that we're rearing and the way in which we're rearing them, that's going to be the place where the next pandemic comes from. And it's going to be 1 in 10 chance every single year that we get it. Which means what? The moment we finish this pandemic, God forbid, tomorrow there's going to be another one and another one and another one. And in the ahadith of Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam, we know that there are predictions, prophecies about the end of time. 1/3 of humankind is going to be killed by bloodshed of war, and the other 1/3 is going to be killed by disease. We have to understand what's happening in front of our eyes. When we talk about taking lessons from what's in front of us, this is what Sh.Faiyaz is talking about. This is what Neil is talking about, that there's a system that is broken and that we need to upend it from its very foundations. The more we begin to imagine the human being as nothing more than a commodity, and that the rest of the world is nothing more than a commodity, the easier it is going to be for us to break this world. We're now talking about colonizing planets. You know, there's the Artemis Accords that talk about what we're allowed to do in space. Can we colonize space? Are we allowed to commodify the moon and Mars? What happens when we go there and bring diseases? We really, really need to have a fundamental conversation. The pandemic was Allah's way of granting us space to do that. If the Muslim community doesn't have that conversation, we cannot expect any other community to have these proper conversations.
While we're having this conversation, I wonder how it was affected by the impending existence of an election over your head, especially you, Sh.Faiyaz. When we're looking at the pandemic, Muslim responses, criticizing the system, all this is happening in the context of one of the most important elections of at least my lifetime. Were you able to have a productive conversation in that climate?
I mean, I think it further amplified sort of the divide and the polarization of this country, if anything else. I don't know if this pandemic didn't happen, what would have happened in November. I'm sure the results would have been far different, I think, due to the incompetency that we saw from, our leadership in the United States through the, COVID-19 pandemic really illuminated in a lot of people's minds kind of the reality of, what this man's perspective on human life was, at the most basic. And then how that manifests sort of socioeconomically as well, in addition to the race issue that we saw in the summertime in the United States and its amplification. All of that sort of played a major role in swinging the vote, in my understanding, in my estimation, November. I mean, I think, but if you go back and take a look at the numbers, there's that much more work to do, right? We're talking about a country that was virtually, divided in terms of the number of votes in the general election, and that we were a couple of states away, so to say, for those of you who understand the electoral college and the process as it works over here, from having another 4 years of incompetency, and that to me is scary as hell, to just be quite frank. What this has done is the events leading up to the election, events leading up to the inauguration, with the riot on the Capitol building a couple of weeks back. Again, it further demonstrates the polarity of this country, and the fact that people are on two completely opposite sides of the spectrum in regards to the reality of COVID-19, in regards to the reality of racism in this country, in regards to the reality of police brutality, in regards to the reality of the economic sort of structures at play that keep the rich wealthy, or keep the wealthy rich, and further isolate those who are most isolated and marginalized. If anything, I hope that these next 4 years really shift the mentality and increase the education and eradicate the ignorance of that which we're seeing. I know that the last time we had this conversation, was sometime in the summer. And I remember in the pre-recording, before we hit the record button, we were talking about, you know, the appointment of, you know, the vice president and so on. So
It literally
you know,
happened moments before we started
I
recording.
think it was the same day, yeah, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken. It was a couple of hours before.
Right.
This has been a strange time, to say the least. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Are you guys optimistic? Like the year going forward, do we feel better going forward now, politically speaking, than we were this time last year in America?
What choice do we have? Of course we're more optimistic. Every day has to bring in and ring in a new hope of optimism, right? We're not going to sit here and we're not going to be depressed, or we're not going to complain. We need to be the difference makers, you know. According to, you know, Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen salamullah alayhi, in this famous sermon of the Muttaqeen, he says, "Hum ruhbanun bil-layl luyuthum bin-nahar," right? At night they're worshippers, and at day they're wild beasts in the earth. They're lions, right? We need to work hard. There's people who need help. There are people who are struggling, members of our community. Otherwise, you know, we have to be optimistic. We have to be the light in the midst of darkness, the knowledge in the midst of ignorance. We have to be all of those things, right? That's what our responsibility is in this world. Otherwise, you know, the angels got it right when they told God, you know, oh Allah, like, why do you create this creation? And we're praising you. God said that, you know, I know something you don't know. We have to be that we have to be that response to the angels, inshallah, who Allah says that this is the reason why. You know, otherwise, what are we doing? What are we doing? Inshallah, Allah allows for us to, you know, illuminate those qualities. And all of you, I know, already doing that a lot better than I, but all of our viewers and our community more broadly, inshallah.
Go on, Agha Jaffer. I wonder if the events of the past month have given you the same optimism in terms of the election as well.
We're all pleased that the US electorate was able to see what they saw. It's also very worrying how much support Donald Trump received after 4 years, or maybe even 6 years, of what they had seen of him. So that tells us that there's still something very deep, very underlying about how people are, their behaviors, their thought processes, the level of education, the level of, let's say, propaganda that people are being fed. And as Sh.Faiyaz said, when you see what happened, for example, in the Capitol, how that's manifesting itself, there's so many lessons to be learned there, which I think is a discussion in and of itself. Your question was, am I optimistic? I think that when you look at the start that President Biden has made, I'm a little bit optimistic. I mean, there are certain obvious pledges that he had made that he has seen through. I think the proof is in the pudding. The main thing, as he said over and over again in his inaugural speech, is that he has to be a president that can unite the country. He has to be a president that can go beyond the kind of the lines that have been made, these arbitrary lines that have been made. And I think actions will speak louder than words. And I think if he can do that on an international level, as well as on a domestic level, that would appeal to me. So, for example, I read that there was a policy where there was going to be a pause and a review on the arms that are being spread to certain countries. I don't know whether that's happened, but I did read that, and I think that's a really positive move. My worry is that President Biden's previous political career is what produced Donald Trump, right? And that's a really loaded statement, and I know that, and we only have a very short time. We cannot unpack that. What I mean to say is, at that point, as Sh.Faiyaz said, well, what choice do you have? It's a two-party system, right? So you don't have another choice. It's all well and good us having a theoretical conversation about what could have been, but we don't have that reality at the moment, right? The DNC made sure of that for sure. So I would like to see some sort of move in terms of the international arena. And I really hope for there to be peace building internally. There's a lot of healing that needs to be done. As Sh.Faiyaz said, there are people, millions of people that are hurting financially and through the health circumstances. I think that is priority. And if you can work through those priorities, then that will be a very good start.
Yeah, ordinarily when we have elections, we often think, well, how will they impact on the domestic? But with the US, it always goes back to what about the rest of us because of how powerful that institution is? What about the Muslims in the Middle East who had previously suffered war?
Well, we cannot be ignorant of the effect that Donald Trump has had here. The 6 years that he had at the forefront of being given all of that airtime, our country here has been damaged because of it. And the amount of UK politicians, I mean, it hasn't been for decades where a US president gets a state visit, not an ordinary, a state visit, yeah, meaning that the Queen welcomes him. Barack Obama didn't have that, Bush didn't have that, Clinton didn't have that. Donald Trump was given that 3 weeks into his presidency. It normalized him to such an extent, and we're all suffering because of that ignorance. So we have to understand that, as you said, what happens there across that side of the Atlantic impacts us greatly here. And that's why we're looking towards President Biden to be able to heal a lot of what's been done.
Yeah, it's true. Neil, here's a question for you. If somebody came to you with the anxieties of the political climate,
Yes.
mentioning some of the issues we're discussing and how, we're worried and concerned about the environment and the political climate, and that's having an impact on you to just be yourself and be happy. How would you advise them? How would you help them to deal with the chaos of the world and kind of keep healthy internally? Imagine a client comes to you with the same description.
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Haji? Because I've lost a little bit of internet connection.
Yeah, that's fine. I think we'll also finish quite soon. But people who are going through these issues and dealing with the political issues of our time, if it's affecting our own internal balance and happiness, people got so concerned and worried about these political issues that it affected their own mental health. What do you say to them? How do you guide and advise someone to deal with the chaos of their climate to keep it kind of balanced internally?
Sure. So it's about starting to take a reflective look on yourself. I use theories like the iceberg theory, which I think is quite a powerful theory with individuals. We start off with kind of brainstorming sessions where people can actually review themselves, look at their values internally, where they stand. Politics is one of the things that generally comes out on that, whether it's above the iceberg, above the sea level, or whether it's below. We tend to do a lot of exercises around that theory to bring things that are below the surface to the top of the surface, and things that they perceive themselves to be, the outside world perceives themselves to be, we highlight them. So if they're very good and very positive, we kind of bring them to the forefront and we talk about them in a lot of detail. So we highlight the positive and we try to sink the negative below the sea line. And then in turn, we look at the stuff that's below the sea line and we look at a priority order about how we're going to bring all this good stuff to the top. Political views, issues, things that are really affecting people mentally, psychologically. We can learn to bury them deeper and deeper by bringing more positive energy out and reducing the negativity within oneself. And it's just a course of having to work with somebody either on an individual basis or either in groups for people to learn techniques of how to suppress these negative thoughts. There's theory to say that once you have a negative thought in your head, tell yourself 3 positive things, like straight away, as soon as you have it, within seconds, you think, I can't do this. And then tell yourself something 3 times or 3 things that are really positive, and you watch that negative thought just float away. So there's certain techniques that you can do. There's hypnosis that you can give yourself. There's triggering. An English hypnosis called Paul McKenna talks about triggering things like rubbing the finger together or touching the eye. Sometimes you see actors, politicians doing this stuff when they're in front of camera. And what you're doing is creating yourself a vortex, a force field of positivity. So when you have, to be very quick about explaining it, when you have a very positive feeling within yourself, you feel really good. Maybe your child is sort of jumping up on you and you're running, or there's a really good moment in your life, or you've achieved something really great. You start learning to trigger. So your trigger might be rubbing your fingers together, rubbing your ear, and you build up that sense. You trigger the brain to that sense is something that's really good, and it links in with that emotion. So when you are feeling low and you're feeling really down, if you do the ear again or you do that trigger, it brings that energy back within you. Also teach people breathing techniques, meditation, learning to release some of that stress. Majority, 90% of people will hold their stress and tension within their stomach area. There's a big chakra in that area where people block. They hold a lot of negative chi energy in there. So show people how to breathe properly, how to open up those chakras, the 7 chakras in the body, and to be able to release a lot of tension just through meditation. So just a few points there, really.
Let's not give it all the way, because then people, they should be paying for the rest of it. So that's a preview.
Definitely. Hit me up, NMM Life Solutions, for more information.
Same question to the other two, and we'll finish off, guys. So people are making their plans in the beginning of the year in January. What's the motivation to see them through? What's the motivation to keep them going for the rest of the year, inshallah, with all of the productivity we're speaking about? What's a bit of advice for them as we close the session? Either of you, please, and both. Yeah.
Guys, do you mind if I kick off?
Please.
Majority of people will set a resolution or a wish list at the beginning of the year. By day 28, it's gone out the window. Whether it's health, wealth, relationships, spirituality, it's gone out the window. It's about goal, how to break that down and how to give yourself accountability within that goal. So the goal may be so massive that you want to achieve something, but you've got to learn how to almost take bite-sized chunks and work at that and chip away at that goal so you can actually achieve it. Working with someone like possibly myself or other life coaches or other people, respected scholars that are in front of us right now can help you to kind of pull together a plan to achieve your resolution, your wish, your aspiration, your goal, which I believe that anything's possible. Anything is possible as long as you're able to put your mind to it and do it in a very structured way, in a timely way. Give yourself measures that you can remain accountable for, and just keep focused along that path. Every journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, and you just have to keep stepping forward. It doesn't matter if that step is very small, as long as the direction is forward. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his wisdom, in his amazing wisdom, has put our eyes at the front of our head, so we can only look forward. It's actually painful to turn around and look back. When you look back, you can only look back for a short time. That's to reflect, and then you have to look forward again. So if we keep that psychology within our brains and keep looking forward, forward is the only motion.
Isn't he just inspiring?
Beautiful. I would also say that, to echo that sentiment, probably 2 things. Number 1 is consistency, and number 2, be kind to yourself. Consistency meaning, if you set sort of these really, lavish goals that are unattainable and unachievable, or even if you set things that are achievable and you just don't hit them, you can't self-deprecate and beat yourself up. You got to get back up. That's what our religion teaches us. That's what we need to be doing as human beings. So be consistent, do the best that you can. When you slip up, you get right back up. Be kind.
Wonderful. Sh.Jaffer, last word for you to close us off. What's our advice for the people?
Beautiful. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ever kind, ever merciful. If he was stingy, if he was bakhil, he would never have given to us the things that he's given us, the guidance, the anbiya, the kutub, and so on. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us all this opportunity for us to be able to learn better as a global community, as a national community, and as familial units and as individuals. There can be nothing better than that. That's Allah's grace upon us. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is providing us this opportunity, take a step back and think about what it is that we've achieved during this period, what it is that we want to achieve for the rest of the period that is ahead of us. And as you heard, don't try to bite off more than you can chew. Slow, steady movement and progress is going to be far better. Consistency is far better than trying to take over the world in 1 week.
Alhamdulillah. So that's your month in review. It's been a new month of what's already become a difficult year, but it's one in which all of us have developed plans and projects of things that we want to get done this year and things that we can do, so long as we keep our spiritual self as a priority for our well-being. We discuss things like being close to nature and gaining knowledge and education, engaging yourself in worthwhile projects and carving out time for yourself just to be yourself. This approach and this motivation that I hope you've taken with you on this episode is something which we can take forward for the rest of the year. So no matter what the problems are which face us, whether it's the implications of the pandemic or the election or other political forces or the kind which aren't visible to others but you're struggling with in silence, no matter what those things are, we hope and pray that from this month going forward, your spiritual development and all of our collective development as a community is something which is a priority and achievable in this year. All right, see you next month.